The Hat Lady by Linda Paston. In a childhood of hats, my uncles in Homburgs and derbies, Fred Astaire in high black silk, the yarmulke my grandfather wore, like the palm of a hand, cradling the back of his head. Only my father went hatless, even in the winter. And in the spring, when a turban of leaves appeared on every tree, the Hat Lady came. With a fan of pins in her mouth and pins in her sleeves, the Hat Lady came, the Saint Sebastian of pins, to measure my mother's head. I remember a hat of dove-gray felt that settled like a bird, and the nest of my mother's hair. I remember the pillbox that tilted over one eye, pure Myrna-Loy, and a navy straw with cherries caught at the brim that seemed real enough for a child to want to pick. Last year, when the chemicals took my mother's hair, she wrapped a towel around her head, and the Hat Lady came, a bracelet of needles on each arm, and led her to a place where my father and grandfather waited, head to bare head, and Death winked at her and tipped his cap.
The Hat Lady by Linda Paston was written in 1989 and consists of 4 stanzas with 8 lines each. In this poem, the narrator is speaking about her childhood. She recounts to the audience that many people in her life have, quote, worn hats, and describes the time in when the Hat Lady came for her mother. The Hat Lady, an innocent name indicative of a child's point of view, represents her mother's nurse, deemed the Hat Lady because nurses used to wear little white hats. Thus, throughout the poem, hats refer to illness. The poem in the first stanza gives the audience soft and sympathetic memories of the narrator's childhood, but turns mysterious when saying that her father went hatless, making the audience wonder, how was he different? Stanza 2 transitions to springtime, meaning new beginnings, but is ironic because the Hat Lady is not depicted as a friend, and by using images of pins and needles, Paston elicits doom. The first explicit mention of sickness comes in stanza 3 with the pillbox, and the poem gradually moves from nostalgic to bleak, the first lines depicting a childhood, and the last stanza confirming her mother's death, as well as revealing the previous deaths of her father and grandfather who were introduced in the first stanza. For figurative language, most obviously she continues the hat motif from beginning to end, and there are big images of nature throughout the poem. She uses several similes when saying, like the palm of a hand, when describing the yarmulke, which adds a nurturing tone to the multitude of heads. Also when saying, like a bird on the nest of my mother's hair, which elicits a delicate and fragile image of the mother. She uses metaphors for the turban of leaves, and Paston uses a biblical allusion to Saint Sebastian, a martyr who was killed by being tied to a post and shot with arrows, to illustrate the danger of the nurse's pins. She also uses references to popular culture, including Fred Astaire and Myrna-Loy, who would have been popular during her childhood, which adds to the setting. At the end, the poem closes with a personification of Death, tipping his cap, as if welcoming the mother to the afterlife and closing the story. It is a very personal and very emotional poem because the narrator is remembering a tragedy in her life, including the death of her mother and the heartbreaking effect of illness for a daughter. This poem speaks to the audience members who have had sick relatives, and because the narrator clearly values family, she emphasizes the passage and loss of time with loved ones.